We have another game-changing progressive book about to hit the streets tomorrow, in fact, and that is In Their Names, written by Lenore Anderson, president of Alliance for Safety and Justice. Thank you so much for joining us, Lenore.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so congratulations on the launch of In Their Names, which becomes available today. How does In Their Names contribute to the conversation on criminal justice reform?
Well, a lot of people, when they're turning on the TV these days, they're going to see a lot of hyperbole. This idea of crime and law and order as the solution is kind of a big topic. This is a book that's offering a different perspective. When we look at the impact of law and order policies from back when they began in the 80s and 90s, we can see that they didn't actually achieve safety or helping victims. This is a critical message for the dialogue that's happening right now.
I would imagine so, very much so, and something that's extremely important. I know that David Kennedy, director of National Network for Safe Communities, and also one of my former professors at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Well, he said about your book that it's one of the most effective criminal justice, that you're one of the most effective criminal justice reformers America has ever had, that you're taking a break from your frontline work to show the damage that has come from misrepresenting victims, why respecting victims would change everything, and what a system built on real justice for victims looks like. This seminal book provides a roadmap to a saner and more effective system. And that's a very, very powerful statement from a very well-informed man. And so I'm wondering, where do you propose we start when it comes to building a new safety movement really to fix our very broken criminal justice system?
Well, the big failure of the tough on crime era in the 80s and 90s was that it was supposed to be about victims' rights, but very little talking to victims occurred in developing that approach to crime policy. The first proposal I'm making is that we collect new action rather than just focusing at criminal justice to talk to people actually being hurt and find out what their safety needs are and what their proposals are as it relates to solutions. This kind of information can be a game changer for public safety strategies.
And why do you think it necessarily would be a game changer to really plug into what the victims' needs are?
Well, one of the things that we found, my organization, we've surveyed about 10,000 victims of crime over the last decade, and we found a couple of critical pieces of information out. First, the criminal justice system doesn't actually respond to most crime and violence. Most people who are hurt by crime and violence don't see justice in a courtroom and don't get access to healing services. So that's one big gap that you learn that can be addressed. The other thing that we've learned in our work is that most victims of crime actually prefer a response to safety issues that's more rehabilitative and a lot less about maximum punishment. So this idea that we've done all this mass incarceration in the name of victims, but then when you actually talk to victims, you hear a totally different story. It's one about violence prevention, trauma recovery, mental health, re-entry. Those are the safety priorities that we would be investing in the most if we were listening to people who have been unprotected.
So what I'm hearing is that people want more focus on kind of that rehabilitative angle as opposed to the punitive angle, and yet it's kind of flip-flopped with how our system has been doing it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it's caused quite a bit of damage to approach it this way. One of the things I talk about in the book is this idea of a hierarchy of harm. At the same time that we're seeing racial discrimination and racial disparities in terms of who's incarcerated, we're also seeing racial disparities in terms of victims get access to help and which do not. That's two sides of the same coin there. And so one of the big reasons we really need to think differently about this is most people who are hurt by crime and violence, especially survivors of color, survivors from low-income communities, are not getting support, and that puts them in a more vulnerable situation, likely to be hurt again. So it's really time to abandon that old way of looking at it.
And I know we've evolved a lot as a society in terms of our ability to access information. So I'd like to think the vast majority of people are now somewhat at least aware that our criminal justice system has significant inequities built into it, particularly when it comes to racial disparities and who finds himself in the system versus who doesn't, so on and so forth. Do you think that this spreading of knowledge is what's playing a role more in victims' desires to seek rehabilitative approaches as opposed to punitive?
Yeah, I think that the country has come a long way since the 80s and 90s in terms of broader popular awareness of the racial disparities in our system. And that certainly has a positive impact on everyone from survivors to voters, to looking at this issue differently and seeing what the kind of solutions are. What's exciting and hopeful about the moment we're in is that survivors are building the solutions at the neighborhood level all across the country. There's great examples of survivor-led safety programs that could go much further in terms of stopping that cycle of crime. Just one example in Newark, New Jersey, survivor leaders partnered with the mayor and the police department. The Newark Community Street Team has been doing grassroots street outreach, conflict mediation, and safe passages for kids to get to school, trauma recovery services for victims. That city saw a reduced homicide rate at a time when other cities across the country are seeing an increased rate. So you can see the difference it makes when you really engage with people at the neighborhood level.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of divides have been bridged with that more community-based approach. As far as it concerns maybe state level or local financial investments, like in California with the Department of Victim Services, how is that proven to be in terms of effectiveness when it comes to programs and support provided to victims?
Well, there's been a lot of challenges in getting needed victim compensation, relocation assistance to victims of crime. There was a huge amount of money that's been set aside for victims at the federal and the state level. But when you look at the data, a lot of survivors have not been able to access that. We just put out a report last week called Crime Survivors Speak, where we found that 96% of victims of crime did not get compensation assistance. This is a travesty when you think about it, especially for people who are repeat victims of crime. The most harmed have been the least helped. We have started doing some innovative efforts to expand the kind of programs that victims can get access to. One great model that we've been championing is called the Trauma Recovery Center. It's neighborhood based. It's both long-term mental health support, but also crisis assistance for things like filling out compensation applications. Huge improvement. We see reduced homelessness, reduced substance use disorder for victims who have been able to access that trauma recovery center model. And we've been able to expand it from just one in California. There's now 41 across the country. And our hope is that this new safety movement will result in every neighborhood having a trauma recovery center.
That would be a very powerful thing. And I know a lot of people in communities would appreciate that, especially as the GOP is pushing this narrative that crime is skyrocketing and whatnot. It'd be great if it actually invested in people to, in some way fit these narratives, but those are just thoughts. But in terms of in their names, what really encouraged you to say this is the right time for me to write this book?
Well, we're living in a moment where there's a resurgence of rhetoric around law and order. Voters' concerns around safety are the right concerns to have, to be sure. But it's concerning if we're going to go back to the failed strategies of the past. The rhetoric in the political ads these days sounds like kind of a Groundhog's Day. We've been here before as a nation, and it was really a failure, not just in skyrocketing incarceration, bloated state budgets, broken prison systems, but also, and importantly, in failing to actually help victims or stop that cycle of crime. So I felt like it was urgent to talk about this right now while we're again reconsidering the direction of crime policy in the country.
And I know those in the industry, those who do the research and those who do the work on the ground, that they are receiving your book in such an incredibly positive way, and they love to uplift it. But how about reaching individuals who don't necessarily have this knowledge? Have you seen any kind of response yet in terms of the sampling?
Well, my organization, we work in states as diverse as, Michigan, Texas, Florida, California, Illinois. We bring groups of survivors up to state capitals to sit down with legislators of all political backgrounds. And what we found is that when you can have that human connection, when you can really talk to people who have been hurt by crime and violence, for whom the justice system didn't investigate the case, didn't actually follow up or share information, and didn't provide any services. When you can tell that story, it kind of doesn't matter what the political background is. It's a breakthrough for the listener, and it's helped us build change.
Wow, that is a really powerful thing. And I'm sure there are a number of individuals out there who are extremely grateful for the work that your organization does, as well as really giving them a voice in this book and documenting why it would be so impactful to uplift those voices and ensure they're supported. So thank you so much for that. And I know this is an exciting day with you, or for you, with this book launch. And so I'm wondering if you can tell the viewers out there where they can get their hands on In Their Names.
In Their Names is available in any of your major bookstore outlets. Lots of good independent stores are carrying it. You can go to bookshop.org, or you could go to Amazon as well. It's available there, and you can kind of get it anywhere.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming by and also with sharing this insight. We really appreciate it. That's Lenore Anderson, president of Alliance for Safety and Justice, also the author of the book that just dropped today, In Their Names.